Good morning. Good to be with you on this Monday morning. Hope you're doing well today as we continue in our time in Ruth. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I did, busy, but good. So looking forward to we're gonna chapter two is a long chapter in the way I'm reading from the NIV, and the NIV does not break it down into different sections. But I've read some other translations this morning trying to get ready, and I'm gonna break it down into to way the a translation I like the Net Bible, NET Bible. It's a tool I've recommended before. If you're looking for a really good tool to understand the Greek, the Hebrew of a text in a very user-friendly method, I really would encourage you to check out the Net Bible, netbible.org, I believe it is. I was reading it this morning just to give some more context, and it broke chapter two down into two sections. So I'm going to follow its breakdown. So we're going to read first chapter. Today we'll read chapter one. I'm sorry, chapter two, verses one through three, and then tomorrow we'll read four through basically the rest of the chapter. So let's read today chapter two, verses one through three. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Amalek, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up leftover grain behind anyone whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." She went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Amalek. Okay, so this passage here kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen next. We're going to learn about Boaz, the type of man that he is, and also remember I said last week that Ruth's story is, to me, as much about Naomi as it is about Ruth. And in many ways, to me, Ruth's story is the story of the redemption of Naomi, who begins bitter. And we're going to see through the book of Ruth how deeds of kindness, God's redemptive kindness, done to Ruth and through that to Naomi, will be the tool, the resource, that the gift, the grace that will draw Naomi back from her bitterness. In many ways, this book is the story of Naomi's redemption as it is anything else. So we're setting the stage for this. So remember, last week we talked. They were in Moab, lost everything. Naomi lost her husband, lost her sons, sends her daughters-in-law back to their people. Ruth says she's going to go with her. They come back to Bethlehem. So that's where we are. Now, we see verse 1 that there is Boaz, that there's a good man named Boaz. She had a relative of her husband's side, a man of standing. His name was Boaz. Okay. Well, Ruth says to Naomi, "Hey, I'm going to go glean." And I love the way the text says. It says, as it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Amalek. So it tells us in the very beginning that there's this man of good standing named Boaz who was on the family of Amalek. Basically, he would have been in Amalek's. That's Amalek is Naomi's husband, late husband. He was in Amalek's family. Good man, respected, all that. And so Ruth says, "I'm going to go and glean." Talk about what gleaning is in a second. And just so happens, dumb luck. What do you know? She winds up just pure happenstance, pure luck. Don't um, gleaning from Boaz's field. So let's talk about God's hand in this, and let's talk about gleaning. First, gleaning. Gleaning is a command given to the Israelites in Leviticus 19 verses 9 through 10, where it says that when the harvesters gather up the fields, when they're harvesting the fields, to not the text I was reading this morning says to not harvest to the edge. In other words, that they were commanded to leave a little bit in the fields, um, to allow the poor to gather up what was left. It was a command that God gave to the landowners, to the farmers, to leave some grain behind for the poor in the land. There are people, Society of St. Andrews, some of y'all may have heard of them. They do gleaning here in America. Gleaning is a thing that still happens. It's a good thing. It is the Old Testament. We have this false understanding of Scripture, how God is different from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And if you read the Old Testament through the lens of Jesus, if you read the Old Testament through the lens of grace, you're going to find so many ways that God's abundant grace is seen through the Old Testament. For instance, this notion of gleaning. This is an Old Testament graceful command that they are to remember the poor in their communities. They are to leave room at the margin for the poor. And I think sometimes, I think in many ways, the great sin of our age might be our busyness. Because think of all the ways in which we're too busy to do good. Maybe efficiency is the great sin of our age. Because leaving grain behind in the fields is very inefficient. But God commanded them to, for they were to take care of the poor. I wonder sometimes we're too busy to even see the poor. We're too busy going to meetings, going to tasks that we look past the poor. I think one of the greatest harms that poverty does to people is we no longer see their humanity. Gleaning forces us to stop and remember the poor. And I think that's a command that we need to remember in our modern age, is to remember the poor. So Ruth and Naomi are poor, and she goes to glean and gather up from the excess. And just so happens, hey, what do you know? She winds up at Boaz's field. Think that was dumb luck? Think that was just happenstance? You think she just happened through whatever to wind up at the field of Boaz, who we're going to see be a agent of God's redemptive kindness for Ruth and Naomi in the coming chapters? No, it wasn't happenstance. It wasn't dumb luck. It wasn't just random whatever, random draw the card, whatever. It was hand guiding, God's hand guiding. And we don't believe in a God who is absent from our daily lives, friends. We believe in a God who is active in every opportunity in our life. God is always at work. God is always pushing and prodding and pulling and working. Now, Naomi could have, Ruth could have chosen another field. She could have said, "Nah, I'm not going to that one. No, I'm not going to go that one. I'm going to go to this one over here." So she had to be faithful and follow the nudge of God to that field. But God was nudging. In fact, maybe that's the lesson we could take away from these couple verses here is to pay attention to God's nudge. Because sometimes we can get so busy that we miss God's nudge for the poor. We look past them. We look to our next appointment. We look to our next whatever, and we don't see. And sometimes we get so busy that we don't feel God's nudge to faithfulness, to where He wants us to be, who He wants us to talk to, where He wants us to go, what He wants us to say. Maybe we need to pray for God to open our eyes and our ears and our hearts to hear His nudge, to feel His nudge, to see His nudge, to see where it is that He is pushing us today. So maybe let's practice some stillness and some listening and to see where God is nudging us today. So, well, tomorrow we're going to pick up with Boaz and his conversation with Ruth and with Naomi. Thanks for being with us today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we'll pick up tomorrow with Boaz and Ruth. Thanks for being with us. Have a great day.